Hey YouTube, today I'm going to be showing you a guitar from my collection that I've had for a few years now. And this guitar, I was thinking about it because I just recently got this Conqueror, this Bruno Conqueror Fran from Japan. Check it out. I've got a whole series of my restoration, and it's a pre-lawsuit made in Japan Gibson style guitar, and it reminded me of this guitar, which was the guitar that really got me into the pre-lawsuit made in Japan, and that is this Ibanez made Carlo Robelli. You see the pre-lawsuit Gibson style open book headstock, and very nice maple top, beautiful maple top, and nicely stained body and stuff. Now we'll talk about in this video the ways that they were cutting and manufacturing in order to undersell Gibson and so forth, but very nice guitar, very nice. And it also has this awesome, you know, 70s orange with the aluminum side and everything, original hard shell case that comes with it. So stay tuned as we get deeper into this Ibanez made Carlo Robelli Les Paul copy from the pre-lawsuit era made in Japan. So one of the myths that you encounter out there a lot about guitars of this era and the history of this guitar in terms of global manufacturing and so forth is that the made in Japan pre-lawsuit, quote-unquote pre-lawsuit guitars were essentially exact copies of their American counterparts. Primarily Gibson, but also Fender designs as well. And that's not true. They're not exact replicas. Similar to, as you understand today, Gibsons. The lawsuit era is leading up to the most famous lawsuit, the biggest one being 1977 Gibson versus Ibanez, and they settled that, and this started the shift towards particularly the shape of the headstock was the center point of that. And the reality is that copies or clones or whatever you want to call them still prevail to this day. Most guitar companies, if you're going to start making guitars, you don't start with a radically different design. You start with one of the standards. You start, if you're going to do the Fender stuff, you do a Strat and a Tele. If you're going to go Gibson, you do an LP, maybe an ES or an SG. Like, these are the standards that if you want to cut your teeth making guitars, you make some guitars that look like this, and you go from there. And so, you know, it is not true to say that this is a straight up copy. And so let's talk about some things that make this distinct before we get into kind of the features of what makes it great, but what makes it different and how they were cutting cost. For one thing, the body. Now this is not, you might hear a lot about like plywood guitars, and that is referring to particularly the Japanese are really good at laminated sheet wood. And one of the ways that they would cut in manufacturing is by having lots of laminated sheets that are then glued together, pressed together and everything, and each sheet is already cut with the cavities as necessary, kind of like imagine a 3D printer. So each layer is got the different holes as needed, and that way you don't have to do as much body cavity work and so forth. They're very good at that. And so the plywood guitars, you know, you have this image of like a shack or something, but they were actually like still nice guitars and so forth. Now these are all, I mean, we're budget, right? We're talking budget. But in terms of this one, what did they do? This is not a plywood in the sense of lots of little laminate sheets, but it does have multiple mated body pieces. Now that's normal to have slab mating, but this does it in 2 levels. So here's the electronics cavity opened up there. And if you look very close, you can see that there is actually 2 plies. They meet right there, and you can, you know, it's not immediately noticeable, but especially if you put your finger on it, it's not perfectly mated because it doesn't need to be. It's just an internal cavity. But you can see you've got basically 2, you know, slightly over 1-inch slabs mated together at that point, and only by uncovering this do you really see it. You can also see a little bit with the stain, but it's not something that really, you know, jumps out at you. It's just if you look very closely, you can see some slight differences in the way that the stain penetrated the 2 different layers of wood. And again, that allows for having the cavity here on the front side, and then the back piece having cavities cut for the electronics, And so that way it simplifies manufacturing. It has more pieces of wood, so the wood pieces themselves can be smaller. You're not having to take as large a slab, so that cuts cost out of it. And the neck is you can see a little bit of damage here, and the damage had been stained over, but it wasn't real finished real well, and so I'm still working on relicking that little bit of damage. But for being a guitar of approximately 55 years, give or take, old, it's in remarkable shape. But it's hard to catch exactly on camera because the stain work is so good, but it is actually multiple pieces running lengthwise. If you check out my Fran from Japan series, same thing going on over here. Same thing. And again, the Japanese were very, very good at taking multiple pieces of wood and laminating them together. And the neck on both of these guitars is a testament to that, because both of these necks are in remarkable shape. You know, even despite this damage just a little bit of paint damage, and you know, these have weathered the storm of the decades of being played and so forth, and both of these were played considerably. This one, when I got it, was played so much that the frets were I could play it, but there were large dead zones, and to take it down you'd almost be going fretless because the dead zones were dug so deep from all the years of doing bends in favorite spots. And so I just refretted the whole thing. And you can see I went with a bronze, not quite gold, but you know, like the brass on there. I just think it gives it a cool vintage vibe. And I did a number of things to this guitar to bring it up to this level. And we'll get into that more in just a little bit. But in terms of where does this guitar come from? Carlo Robelli is a house brand. Now, it did not start as a house brand, but it is a house brand of Sam Ash, the big music company. And unfortunately, Sam Ash has closed their local stores, and they've moved to online. And it's a major, you know, reality with brick and mortar music stores, that it's harder and harder for them to compete with the internet retailers and so forth. That's its own whole issue. But Sam Ash acquired Carlo Robelli, I believe, in the 50s, and they had been primarily, I believe, violins and, you know, classical instruments, acoustic guitars and so forth. But anyway, it became one of Sam Ash's brands. And so Carlo Robelli is a Sam Ash brand. It continues to be, I believe, to this day. I'm not sure with the restructuring, but pre-restructuring, it was still a label that you can still get instruments made under today. Now, this particular one came from the Ibanez factory, and there were a few different runs of these that came from a few different manufacturers. This one came from Ibanez, and the key that helped me as I looked in forums, because these don't have serial numbers, it's very typical of Japanese guitars from the era to not have serial numbers, but the star, you see the stars there on the tuners, the stars on the tuners are what gave it away that this was a subtle branding by Ibanez. And these are fantastic tuners. They're very, very nice tuners. And it is just a super cool guitar. You can see the, you know, very nice flame maple. I mean, it just catches the light from every angle. It's super cool, vintage looking, very much captures the vibe of that, you know, late 60s, early 70s. And it is just a, you know, really, really cool guitar. You see the aluminum inlays there. And again, when I got this, it was really crusty. Ironically, I bought it online, but from Sam Ash, from one of their local stores, that somebody had turned it in as a used guitar, and I guess they didn't really know what to do with it, so I got it for a song, and you know, and it came with that awesome case as well, the original hardshell case. It was really rough. It was very rough around the edges and so forth, but it was just rough. It wasn't in bad shape. I mean, you can see it's still got all four of the original knobs on there, which if you go and price out made in Japan circa 1970 knobs, I mean, the knobs themselves are just about what I paid for this guitar. I know the case is worth, because I've seen Ibanez cases of that era go for on Reverb what I paid for the whole thing. They just, you know, somehow they didn't really know what they had, and you know, rather than clean it up and make it worth something, they just sold it like it was. But very, very nice. So given all the various caveats and everything, this made in Japan Ibanez made guitar plays great. And I love the vintage sounding tones. I mean, I'm a vintage tone guy. I'm much more situated in my tone in the mid 20th century, and this plays to my tone sensibilities. Right now I've got it on the bassman setting with no extra effects or anything, and it just, you know, I love, love, love the tones that you get out of this. Right now I've got it on both. Everything's at about 7 to 8. Put it up on the bridge there. I get carried away with myself there. I go up to the rhythm. Love the depth of the kind of the darkness of the sounds you can get out of this. The minors are particularly tasty on this. Had to take a quick tune break there. I usually have a strap on. The reason I don't right now is because I repaired the strap button. The hole where the screw goes in there had, it was starting to come loose. So I reinforced it, and I'm still letting it set up before I put any weight on it. So just playing it over my knee. But the, let's hit my triple shot on the effects and see what we got here. Same settings otherwise. And I turned it down just a wee bit because of the higher gain. So what do y'all think of my Carlo Robelli Ibanez made pre-lawsuit Japanese Les Paul? What do you guys think? Have you guys had guitars like this, or what are your thoughts on the made in Japan stuff, and what are your experiences? Love to hear back from you. As always, thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe. Just building the channel. Appreciate y'all, and have a wonderful day.